Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this World of Warcraft raiding guide. In this video, we're going to be taking a look at the 10-man heroic mode version of Warmaster Blackhorn in the Dragon Soul raid. In order to complete this fight, we used 2 tanks, 2 healers and 6 DPS. As always, the first half of this video is going to be taking a look at a list of abilities that this boss has. If you wish to skip this section and head straight to the tactics, then please feel free to click on the annotation that is in the top hand left of your screen. Just like in the normal mode version of this encounter, there is still 2 stages to this fight. In the first stage, you will just be fighting off the drakes that's flying around the ship like crazy drakes do, and in the second stage you will fight Warmaster Blackhorn himself. However, this time he will have help from Goriana. You will still have the harpoon guns, which will pull drakes close to the ship for your ranged DPS to attack, and in the heroic mode version of the fight there is a new ability called Deck Fire, and every now and then a random deck fire will burst out on the ship, and if you stand in the fire, standard WoW logic suggests that you will take damage. Don't stand in the fire, kids, it is bad for you. In the heroic mode version of this encounter, Goriana, Warmaster's Drake, gets a lot more involved in the fight. Just like in the normal mode version, she still does the Twilight onslaughts, and you still need to soak the purple circles that will be on the ground. However, you need to make sure you're soaking as many as possible, because the Skyfire has got a lot less health in heroic mode. On heroic mode, she has a new kind of ability as well, which is called Broadside, and she will periodically unleash a vicious barrage of fireballs that will damage the Skyfire, and this will deal 20% of the remaining structural integrity as damage to the ship. You don't want your ship to be hit by balls of shadowy doom, it'll be bad for you. And as I also stated earlier on in the video, the assault drakes will also be flying around the ship, firing their Twilight Barrage balls of death at the ship as well. Now these are the smaller circles that will appear on the ground, and just like with the big circle from Goriana, you need to soak these as much as possible. However, if you are to soak one of these, you will take 50% increased shadow damage for 15 seconds, and this is a stacking debuff on you. So you need to bear this in mind if you are soaking the small ball damaging ship things from the assault drakes, and you are then going to soak a big one from Goriana. You need to bear in mind the amount of damage that you're going to take, and your healers do also need to be aware of any debuffs that may be on you. In the heroic mode version of the encounter, you will also get 3 waves of 2 assault drakes spawning. Just like in the normal mode version of this encounter, you will also have the 2 mobs that will spawn on the deck during the first phase, and these are the Elite Dreadblades and the Elite Slayers. Now, the tanks also need to keep an eye out for these debuffs, because just like in the normal mode version of the encounter, they need to alternate the tanking with these mobs when they spawn. A total of 6 mobs will spawn throughout the entire encounter. People also need to be a lot more aware of the Blade Rush abilities, because as this is a heroic mode encounter, the chances are this ability will one-shot you. And the final mob that also spawns in this encounter is the Twilight Sapper. Now this is something that your DPS do need to look out for, because the Sapper will be dropped onto the deck randomly throughout the encounter, and if the Sapper is to reach the Skyfire's bridge, it will explode using his explosives, as you can see so perfectly described on the screen, and this blast will inflict 250,000 fire damage to anyone that's standing within 8 yards of it, so that's pretty much a one shot, and it will also damage the Skyfire for 20% of its total health. You do not want this to happen. You need as much health on the Skyfire as possible. Classes with abilities such as Death Grip, so your Death Knights, and I believe Boomkins with the Typhoon ability, can knock the Sapper away from the Skyfire's bridge, which will buy the DPS some more time to actually kill it off. Once you've defeated 3 waves of the Dragon Riders, Warmaster Blackhorn will then jump down onto the ship, and phase 2 will begin. One of Warmaster Blackhorn's first abilities is called Devastate, and this will sunder the target's armor, so your tank's armor, and they will take a lot of increased damage. It's recommended that you only take 2 stacks of this debuff, and then the tanks swap. His next ability is called Disrupting Roar, and every now and then he will scream very fiercely, because he is a Warmaster, and this will inflict 75,000 physical damage to everyone that's on the gunship. This will also interrupt any spellcasting for players that are standing within 10 yards of Warmaster Blackhorn for 8 seconds. This is something that healers and your spellcasting DPS definitely need to look out for, more so the healers. The Warmaster's next ability is called Shockwave, and this is a frontal cone ability that will deal 100,000 physical damage to anyone that is 80 yards in front of Warmaster Blackhorn when he turns to face them. He will randomly target players for this ability, so the whole raid do need to be aware of where he is facing. There is an animation on the ground that does show where his cone is going to be fired, I guess you could say, and if you are to get hit by it, it will stun you for 4 seconds. His next kind of ability, I guess you could call it, is called Vengeance, and the more damage that Warmaster Blackhorn takes, the more damage he would deal. So for every 1% health he loses, he will deal 1% more damage. So you don't want to be full on nuking him. Say for example you have amazing DPS, you don't just want to take off 30% of his DPS, or his health even, and then all of a sudden he's dealing 30% more damage and Goriana hasn't even left the ship yet, because your healers are going to hate you. And his next ability is called Siphon Vitality, and when he is severely injured, he will drain health from Goriana, and the health that he drains from her will deal damage equal to 20% of Goriana's remaining health to people on the ship, and it will also heal Blackhorn accordingly. So you don't want to be full on nuking Blackhorn. That's the moral of this story. Make sure your DPS are killing off Goriana when phase 2 starts as a priority. Just like in the normal mode version of the encounter, Goriana will still fire the twilight flames at the ship while she is in the air. However, on heroic mode, when she reaches 90% health, she will land on the Skyfire in order to assist Warmaster Blackhorn. When she lands on the Skyfire, she gains a new ability called Twilight Breath, and this is basically a standard dragon ability in WoW. It's just a frontal cone of breath that will deal pain to anyone that is standing in its way. Tanks make sure it's facing away from the raid, it's simple really. And the final ability for this encounter is called Consuming Shroud, and this is basically a healing debuff that will be placed on a player, and they will absorb 100,000 healing received. However, when it absorbs the incoming healing, damage will be dealt equal to the amount healed to the rest of the players that are on the ship. Now, this isn't that much damage really, especially if you're just using low ticking HOTS, so your healers can just heal through it really. However, if you are to die when you have this ability on you, it will release all the remaining energy at once, so make sure that is kept as a priority to look out for, healers. And now we've managed to take a look at a long list of abilities this boss has, we're actually going to be able to move on to the tactics section of the fight. Now, because this is a heroic fight, you want to utilise your DPS as much as possible. So when the first wave of Twilight Drakes is flying over the ship to drop the first 2 mobs down, it's advisable that you have your ranged DPS stand as far to the side of the ship as possible in order to get some extra damage on them. Now, like I said earlier on, both of the tanks need to alternate the tanking with the Dreadblades and the Slayers. So for example, if one tank takes a Dreadblade on the first wave, he needs to take a Slayer on the next wave. And you need to be soaking these purple patches as much as possible. In order to take care of the Assault Drakes, we assign 2 ranged DPS to each side. It doesn't really matter which ranged DPS you assign, just as long as you get them killed as fast as possible. So it's highly preferable to have a minimum of at least 4 ranged DPS in this fight. Melee can hit them, but you generally want them to be on your ads that will spawn on the ship or get dropped off by the Drake. What you just saw was a sapper spawning, and that was one of the easier ones. The first sapper that spawns is always the easiest one to take care of because there will be nothing else on the ship. It'll be a little bit more difficult later on in the fight, and you need to be a lot more aware of when a sapper is being dropped. Now again, more mobs have spawned on the ship here and more Drakes are appearing, and you can also see the deck fires are starting to burst out. Don't stand in fire. You get these little guys that you can see like streams of blue going down onto the fire. They're just fire extinguishers / firefighters, and they will put out the fire, but it does take quite a bit of time. The animation for the fire can also be relatively buggy, so you could look like you're not standing in it, but you actually are. And as you can see, we have mobs using their Blade Rush ability. Make sure that you don't get hit by that because it will one-shot you as it is a heroic mode encounter. we've just killed off the second wave of the drakes, and here is the third one about to land. There are the mobs being dropped off. Hello there, Mr. Mob. And the drakes are going to their sides. Now you just saw another sapper get dropped, and this is where we definitely need to use DK's abilities in order to slow them, and also abilities such as Death Grip in order to bring the mob away from the actual bridge, which will then cause the explosion. Just as a quick side note as well, the faster you kill the drakes at the side, the less damage the ship will actually take, because these mobs are firing the purple balls at the ship itself, and it's also causing deck fires to spawn, as well as damaging the ship in the long run. And like I've already said, the ship has less health in heroic mode, and things do deal relatively more damage. Now the fight is progressing quite a bit here. We're about 3 minutes in, and the deck is pretty much covered in fire, so it becomes really hard to move around, and it can become relatively problematic to soak the purple circles that are on the ground. When the last wave of the Twilight Drakes has been killed off, Goriana will fly to her normal position, which is just above the ship to start off with, and the ranged DPS just need to attack her in order to get her to 90% health. Tanks are to just keep Blackhorn to the side and to be swapping when he reaches 2 debuffs. As you can see, lots of damage will be going out here. There's the AoE from Blackhorn every now and then, and there's also the Twilight Flames that you could stand in like I did there by accident. And we'll soon see the healing debuff that Goriana will place on a player. Now, definitely not much room to move around with here, but it's highly doable. What you want to do is have one tank Goriana and one tank Blackhorn, and you just alternate the tanking when one of them gets to the 2 debuffs. As you saw a second ago as well, there was also the frontal cone Dragon's Breath from Goriana. You just want to be keeping her faced away from the raid at all times. Now you can see this shaman to the side who just died. He had this blue circle around him and he was having pulsing damage come out from him. That's the healing debuff that Goriana places on a player, and it's not something to highly worry about really. It's healable as long as you're not using really big heals. So here, what I was speaking about earlier, when Blackhorn is damaged for 1%, he will deal 1% more damage. And I know I say the healing debuff doesn't do much, but if you've got that going off, and then you've got his shockwave AoE going off, which is dealing 1% more damage, it's going to start doing quite a bit of damage. So this is why you need to kill off Goriana first, and then when she reaches a certain percentage, she will fly away, and then you're able to just focus on Blackhorn. It's there when she reaches around 18-19% health, she'll just happily fly away. So yeah. And then we just focus on Blackhorn. Now, one of the mini tactics here is, in order to stop the whole raid having to move for the frontal cone that Warmaster Blackhorn does, we just had we had the mage, which was me, stand out to the side, and if he gets targeted, then all he has to do is blink away. And that also saves the entire raid from actually stacking up. It's just one of those making the fight a little bit easier tactics for you. And the rest of the fight from this point on is effectively a tank and spank. As long as your healers can keep the raid alive, then you will just be tanking and spanking this boss. And that is going to do it for this raiding guide. Sorry the tactics section took so long, but everything has to be explained in these videos because that's just how I do it. As always, thank you for watching, and if this raiding guide has helped you get a kill in any way and earn epic loots as well as fat loots and achievements which are meaningless, then please feel free to subscribe to the channel for future World of Warcraft raiding guides.